According to Simpsons Wiki, there are over 9,000 Simpsons characters, and even if you cut out all the guest stars and one-timers, you're still left with at least 100 or so recurring characters. And out of this entire and huge group, there seems to be one in particular that fans simply can't stand. A character that is almost universally disliked. Helen Lovejoy.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Now, I came to this result after asking you guys who your most disliked character was, and the response was overwhelming with over 700 comments, and the names that came up the most were Helen Lovejoy, Artie Ziff, Sherry and Terry, and Agnes Skinner. So I then took those names and created a poll, and with more than 80,000 votes cast, Helen Lovejoy took the lead with a staggering 66%. But that wasn't enough because God knows I love making a poll, so I made another one with other names, and again, the majority of you still voted for Helen being the worst. This is pretty damning, and I've got to be honest, I knew Helen Lovejoy was unpopular, but I didn't realise that she was this disliked. So, what's the deal? What exactly do so many people have against this woman? Let's look through her history on the show and find out, and along the way, let's see if we can find at least some redeeming features. Helen Lovejoy first appears in the 9th episode of the show Life in the Fast Lane. Here she catches Marge on a date with Jacques, and from the very start we're shown exactly what kind of person she is. A nosy, gossiping busybody.
Why, isn't that Marge Simpson over there? Having brunch with a man who isn't her husband? And I just had to come over and say hello.
Helen's character design also made it very obvious as to who she is, because her face is long and narrow with very pointed and sharp features that only complement the harshness of her character. She just doesn't have the same rounded features as everyone else, with the soft nose and almost doe eyes like, well, even her husband. There's not really a warm or kind look to her. In fact, she almost looks like an alien. But that's a theory for another time. I also don't think it's a coincidence that sharper angles and features have been used to bring villains or more antagonistic characters to life for decades. So does her character design play into the large role in how we view her? It does make you think. Her clothing also says a lot about her, in that she may not be this cartoonish villain, but she is very, very uptight. I mean, she's literally tied up with a neat little bow. This, I think, was another intentional choice when creating her character, especially when she stood opposite Marge, who is bare-shouldered and wearing a strapless dress. And her character's conservative clothing also matches her developing conservative views, which we'll then see more of in her next speaking role in Season 2's Itchy and Scratchy and Marge. Here she readily joins the protest against violence in cartoons, and is also shown to be very chummy with Maude, which I will touch on later. But even after getting all of the violence removed from Itchy and Scratchy, she and Maude still unhappy, soon turning their wrath against Michelangelo's David.
It's filth. It graphically portrays parts of the human body, which, practical as they may be, are evil.
And when Marge steps back, Helen steps up, demanding that the curator gets the hell out of town.
We want you to get your big Italian butt out of here.
It's also worth noting that in this same season, we find out that she and Reverend Lovejoy run their own marriage counselling retreats, which ironically later episodes would pick apart by putting a bigger focus on their own dysfunctional marriage, as well as their issues with intimacy.
Is this dominating enough for you, sweetheart?
Go back to the cowboy thing and wait in the car.
And if you want to know a bit more about their kinky love life, maybe I'll cover that in Reverend Lovejoy's timeline. I have been thinking about bringing that series back, so let me know in the comments if you'd be interested.
Was that a woman's voice? Send her in.
But anyway, bringing it back, and Helen's next biggest role came in Season 4's Marge in Chains, where we find out that she has weekly poker nights with Dr. Hibbert and Miss Hoover. And at first I thought this was a really random group pairing. I mean, what do any of them really have in common? But then it hit me. Helen's got the inside scoop on everything here. She learns all the juicy details about her friends' kids' grades, and even the latest gossip about everyone's confidential medical history. Very shrewd, Helen. Very shrewd. Later on, when Marge is caught shoplifting at the Quickie Mart and put on trial, Helen Lovejoy is then called in as a witness. And as the Reverend's life, she's privy to very sensitive information. And of course, she spills all the tea.
Marge's husband doesn't earn much, and the family's a mess, and quite frankly, I think she,
After Marge is then sent to jail, Springfield starts falling apart, but when she's released, Helen makes a promise to mend her gossipy ways.
From now on, I'll use my gossip for good instead of evil.
And as we all know, that promise doesn't last too long. In season 6's Bart's Girlfriend, we finally get to meet her daughter, Jessica Lovejoy, who may seem like a little angel, but is really the devil in disguise. I'm telling you, it's all in the eyes. Anyway, despite this episode being about the Lovejoy family, Helen doesn't actually play too much of a role here. In fact, she doesn't talk to her daughter once. Instead, it's the Reverend who steps forward as the overprotective father who threw Bart out of his house, and it was then him who defended his little girl when she was caught stealing. It seems like Jessica is a total daddy's girl. Perhaps it's this family dynamic that hints that Helen is a somewhat uninvolved or negligent parent, which could reason why Jessica has such poor behaviour, and perhaps she acts out not to get her father's attention, but rather her uninterested mother's, who, let's face it, may be too busy with her own gossip to take any notice of her. And while Jessica doesn't speak much after this episode, probably because getting Meryl Streep in was, super expensive, she does make a few more appearances, like in season 33 where we find out that Helen has her daughter heavily medicated.
That's what you acted like before the medicine.
And although Helen is judgmental towards Marge, at least Marge is a very doting mother. So let's add bad mother to her already long list of bad qualities.
Do it, sweetie! Save our troubled marriage!
Which, let's face it, is very ironic because she's always asking for others to
think of the children!
Oh, well, yeah, she doesn't even think about her own. All in all, she's a total hypocrite. And speaking of which, it's not until season 7's Much Ado About Nothing that she says this iconic line.
You think of the children!
And come on, I bet that whenever you think of Helen, you instantly hear this line. So, where did it come from? Well, this is Bill Oakley in a DVD commentary for this episode explaining the meaning behind it.
In every political debate, there's some imbecile who's going, think of the children, even when the children have nothing to do with the debate. And it often derails the debate because you have to think of the children. And really, quite frankly, a lot of things aren't intended for children or have children have no bearing on.
Which kind of sums Helen up to a T. She just wants to be involved, even if it is saying something that has no bearing on anything that is going on. She doesn't care about the kids, she just wants to be outraged for the sake of being outraged. Which kind of has the same effect in season 8's Bart After Dark, where Helen joins the crusade to take down a burlesque house, only to change her mind after hearing this very catchy song.
Yes, we keep the in Springfield.
And in the twisted world of Marge Simpson, she's a member of the Springfield Investorettes who push Marge out of the group.
You're about as popular as Rugburn. All in favor of expelling Marge from the Investorettes?
Aye.
It was this particular episode that really made me think of Helen as more of a mean girl than purely just a judgmental mother. However, we see a far more human side to her in Marge We Trust. When Marge starts volunteering at the church and listening to people's problems, it gets to the point where people stop going to Reverend Lovejoy for guidance and start going to the Listen Lady instead. And so, with Timothy feeling lost without his flock, Helen is concerned for her depressed husband and calls on Marge for advice. This is perhaps the only time where Helen is sympathetic, and her concern for her husband is actually really sweet. But don't get used to it because there aren't many moments like this with Helen. And even if she isn't the most sympathetic character, at least she can be really funny at times, like when she screams this in season 8.
Oh boy, that sounded bad.
Maggie Roswell definitely doesn't get enough credit for how great she is. And speaking of Roswell, let's briefly discuss her other character, Maud Flanders. Now, in most of Helen's appearances, it's usually Maud who takes charge and gets the most lines, but that all changed in season 11's Alone Again Naturally Diddly, when there was a contract dispute between Fox and Maggie Roswell, she quit, and as a result, Maud was killed off. Thankfully, Roswell eventually reached a deal with Fox and returned to the show in 2002. But with Maud's character permanently in the ground, Helen stepped up and became even more antagonistic towards Marge, cranking up her worst tendencies to 11. In season 21, she joins Marge in protesting MMA, but as soon as she gets out of earshot, Helen immediately bitches about her.
What do we do now?
Let's talk about Marge behind her back.
And in season 22, she pressures Marge into buying a ridiculously expensive bag.
Well, those bags are pretty pricey.
All in all, Helen just seems to absolutely relish in making others miserable, even stirring the pot between Bart and Lisa in The Fabulous Faker Boy.
Helen Lovejoy, you always have to stir the pot.
Unlike you when you make your lumpy clam chowder.
She even rewarded herself with a box of wine when she made them both miserable.
My work is done. Now to reward myself with a case of wine.
So therefore, she's not even confined to just being mean to Marge anymore. She's now antagonizing the kids. Whatever happened to think of the children? But yeah, in season 29, Marge is kind enough to invite Helen and a few other ladies over, and Helen still has a few cutting comments.
I've had better lemonade at Ralph Wiggum's stand, and he stirs it with his finger.
And she doesn't stop there, going on to criticize Marge's interior decorating.
You have many wonderful talents, but your sense of style is,
One of them?
I'm afraid not.
And when Marge sets out to prove them all wrong by becoming a professional interior decorator, Helen still can't help herself throwing shade.
Well, maybe you can fool the Hibberts, but to me, this is a work of a
Genius.
And again, later on when she discovers Marge has redesigned a brothel, you can bet your life that Helen is there to pass judgment again.
Marge, I never thought someone could sink this town lower, but you have.
Thankfully, we have seen Marge get some payback, like when she slapped her in season 28.
Maybe we shouldn't have sent Homer Simpson into that den of sin.
My husband's a good man.
And in one of my all-time favourite Marge moments ever, she roasts Helen in season 30's Working Mums.
Why are you so bitter, Helen? Is it because your husband would rather play with his toy train than with you?
Even now, in recent episodes, like in season 33, Helen is still giving Marge a hard time.
It must be so easy to shop when anything's good enough for your family.
But at least Marge gets her revenge by sneaking in some very embarrassing items into her cart.
And garbage mouth, bad breath, neutralizing suppositories.
Now, personally, I don't dislike Helen. She's had too many funny moments. Like, think of the children calling Wiggum pervert, and that time where she invited Marge to become a throuple. But perhaps my all-time favourite Helen moment came recently in season 36's Women in Shorts, which is basically a spiritual sequel to 22 short films about Springfield. Here she mistakenly believes that the world is going to end, and she immediately loses her inhibitions, goes outside, and knocks out Flanders. Then she kisses Mo before destroying her husband's train set, all before she finds out that the world isn't actually ending.
It's a great hobby. Very, manly? I don't know.
Ultimately, Helen Lovejoy perfectly serves her purpose in the show. She's written to be as unlikable as possible, and the writers have certainly succeeded in that. She's the judgmental mother in the playground, the mean girl that never grew up, the women that exist very much in our world, and again, The Simpsons took that stereotype and perfectly fitted her into Springfield, and more specifically in Marge's stories. Let's be honest, she's a great antagonist for Marge because she's like her in a lot of ways. Both are mums of troublemakers, but while Marge tries to teach her kids life lessons, Helen doesn't seem to do the same. Marge can act as a moral authority, but is also open to change during debates and reconsider her stance, while Helen is far more confrontational and stubborn. It's therefore these differences that highlight Marge's civility and emotional maturity. And sure, there are plenty of antagonistic characters in The Simpsons, like Mr. Burns and Sideshow Bob, but the difference between them and Helen is that fans don't dislike them. But I think the real reason why Helen stands out in terms of fans' hatred is that she has no real redeeming qualities. Unlike other characters, there's nothing really about her that makes you root for her. And on top of that, out of everyone in the show, she's the one who's the most realistic. I'm sure we all know someone like Helen Lovejoy, someone who thrives on gossip and makes snide remarks. She's self-centered and has a huge superiority complex. As such, she's very easy to get under your skin, unlike, the more outlandish characters in Springfield. And although I've never really minded Helen, I can see why she may rub fans up the wrong way. Because while she is supposed to be this comedic character, I can understand how her one-dimensional portrayal can feel repetitive and make her less endearing compared to other characters on the show, therefore leading to frustration amongst fans. But what do you think of Helen Lovejoy? Does she really deserve all the hate? Let me know in the comments below. Also, a big thank you to my awesome Hellfish patrons for supporting the channel. Thanks so much, and I'll smell you later.